We're a national charity, anti-slavery charity, and we're based in Bristol. Whilst we have been involved in policy influence and research since Unseen's inception, really, in 2008, we've had a standalone policy and research department since 2022. And our department's work, it spans quite a few different activities involving all parts of the organisation. So we've worked with a real range of different academics and researchers in partnership. We're drawing on Unseen's expertise, our connections with different stakeholders, and also the Unseen survivor consultants to co-produce this research. And this research has spanned a real range of disciplines that intersect with modern slavery. We're also currently running some larger internal projects, drawing on those insights from right across the organisation and also with those external stakeholders as well. We're halfway through a year-long project evidencing the impact of recent immigration legislation, for example, and we're in the first year of a 5-year project, which is all about identifying and engaging underrepresented and also hard to reach communities, but also regularly producing shorter pieces responding to emergent threats or developments. We're currently releasing a series looking at the cost of modern slavery to various public agencies, which is something actually that the survivor consultants raised back in 2022. Our Survivor Involvement Programme, this is designed to equip the Unseen survivor consultants to co-produce research with research partners, but also with our own teams to guide Unseen's policy priorities and any improvements to Unseen's service delivery as well. And they have been pretty central to nearly all of the projects that we've run, both internally and with those external partners as well. With policy consultation, Unseen has long advised policymakers on what we understand as priorities and things that the changes that really the UK needs to see. And that's based on our experience, our areas of work. And now, of course, the survivor consultants are doing that as well. And of course, our teams, we're regularly acting as respondents to research, and we're here to connect researchers with that really diverse range of partner organisations and representatives as well. So all of our policy and research work, it is done from a starting point of expertise within the organisation across all of our areas of activity. So we operate the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline. We receive thousands of calls and contacts a year from survivors, from the public, from businesses, from professionals. This gives us a real insight both into the presentation and the operation of modern slavery in the UK, but also the function of the response and the support systems as well. We're a first responder organisation and we provide operational support to law enforcement. We attend welfare and operational activity anywhere where modern slavery is suspected. So again, we have this real understanding of modern slavery presentation, the practicalities of the first responder process, the challenges that victims face in accepting support, and the gaps and the good practice in statutory responses. We're also a victim care contract provider, so we support people in the National Referral Mechanism system through outreach and safe housing support. We've got over 15 years experience working directly with survivors and within that system, and we really know the challenges that they face and what it is that they need to start their recovery journey effectively. Then we've got our business services team. They work with the private sector and more recently the public sector as well, supporting them to identify and to mitigate risk of exploitation within their supply chains. And we also lead anti-slavery partnerships in the Eastern and the Southwest regions. And here we're supporting a really wide range of partners just to respond effectively to exploitation. So we have that insight into victim identification, the criminal justice process, emergent threats, trends in presentation, the impact of policy decisions, and really just what works and what doesn't work across those spaces. And our policy work, it straddles all of these work streams. So we're able to work with researchers to identify what really matters because of how hands-on we are across so many different areas. So with the Modern Slavery Helpline, that holds one of the largest data sets on modern slavery in the UK. We've also developed a victim case management system, which our frontline teams are populating, and that provides not only insight into support and recovery, but also potentially trafficking routes and perpetrator models as well. Our business services team, they are abreast of efforts in the corporate sector to mitigate exploitation, but also they are across those gaps in the delivery of safe work and the remediation of those exploitative practices, and also the structural blockers to this as well. And like the anti-slavery partnerships, the business services team, they have really significant links to stakeholders operating in the anti-slavery space and that opportunity to collaborate with them. And then, of course, the unseen survivor consultants, they're able to speak with expertise across all of these themes. To start us off, I've invited Helpline Quality and Development Manager Alice Dutton from the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline just to speak a little on our data models. Over to you, Alice.
Thanks, Hilary. I'm just going to give a bit of an overview about the data model at the helpline, but I thought it'd be helpful to start by talking about why we have so much data at the helpline. We like to think about the helpline having two pillars. We have the services and the advice that we offer to callers and contacts to the helpline. And then almost as a byproduct of all of those conversations, we get an awful lot of data through every time someone calls or emails or sends a web form to us. And whilst the primary focus of our service is always going to be meeting the needs of that caller or of that point of contact in the moment, through every conversation or interaction we have, we get told information about modern slavery and human trafficking. And through our helpline advisors recording this information, we can build the bigger picture of what is happening within the UK. Hence my bigger picture on the screen. That's meant to be what that analogy is for. Our data model results in us having a really unique and, as Hilary said, one of the largest data sets on modern slavery and human trafficking in the UK. And the reason we have this, again, is for a number of reasons that I thought it'd be helpful to talk about. The Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline, we cover the whole of the UK. So although unseen specifically is the Southwest, the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline takes calls from all across the UK. So we're getting a big picture across the whole of the UK. We are also a confidential helpline. We do have safeguarding exceptions to that, but primarily confidential, which means we get information on situations that callers might not necessarily want to give their details to. We are also independent from the government and from the police, which means that we often get calls from people who fear having an involvement with authorities. It's really important to us that we're person-centered. So for an adult not at immediate risk of harm, we are led by what they want to do in the situation. We want to recognize that a survivor is the expert in their own situation, and we are never going to tell them what to do, which means that we have lots of conversations with people who aren't identified to authorities, who aren't known by the government, aren't reflected in official stats, which makes our data model really unique. We also have interpreters in over 200 languages, which means that we speak to a really broad range of people who often don't have the opportunity to speak to anyone else about their situation due to language barriers. So as part of our data model, we have this really dynamic and flexible data model, which we can change over time based on the new trends that we're seeing or new information that we're getting. What we're largely focused on is recording information about the type of exploitation. So recording whether or not it was sexual exploitation, labour exploitation, domestic servitude, criminal exploitation as the four main types that we see. But then we also want to record more specific information within that. So we're looking at where the exploitation has occurred. So literally geographically, is it in Hertfordshire? Is it in Scotland? But also, where is it occurring? Is it a business? If it is in a business, what type of business is it in? That allows us to track trends in terms of industries. Also, is it happening in private homes? Is it happening in brothels? Are we seeing it on the streets? Is it being picked up on trains? What types of locations are we seeing that modern slavery and human trafficking is occurring? We also want to record demographic information on survivors and on exploiters. So, for example, nationalities, languages spoken, age, and gender. And it's incredibly important for us to look at the individual's reference on a case and look at their interaction with the case. And what I mean by that is, what is the relationship between the survivor and the exploiter? Was there a pre-existing relationship that set up to that recruitment method or enabled a method of control? How was each individual recruited into a slavery situation? Was there a job offer made? As I said, were they known to each other? Was it familial? Was it an intimate partner? Was it a promise of a better life? It's really helpful for us to be able to know how recruitment is happening so that more work can be done to intercept trafficking. We will also look at how each survivor was controlled. Modern slavery and human trafficking can look like many different situations, and exploiters are incredibly clever and will prey on specific vulnerabilities and will adapt their methods of control depending on each situation. It's really important for us to record how each person in that situation was controlled, because it helps us dispel myths about modern slavery and human trafficking, and to prove that it can look like many different things in many different situations. We're also interested in recording who is contacting us and their relationship to the situation. We speak to many different types of callers. We speak to survivors themselves, survivors who are still in the situation, but also survivors who have left the situation and want to access support. We also speak to friends and family members of survivors, professionals who are involved in supporting, but also many people who think they have seen a situation of modern slavery and aren't quite sure either what to do with that, if they're a professional supporting that person, and lots of reports from members of the public who are aware of the indicators of modern slavery and call us to report their concerns. From all of this, as you can imagine, we are an incredibly busy helpline. So we record every time we're contacted. So we look at how many incoming calls we get, how many callbacks are we making, how many web forms, how many app submissions are we getting. And in all of those calls, we are here to offer people guidance on where they can go next with the situation, which means we give many people signposts. So we record how many signposts we're giving, what types of signposts are we seeing, where are we seeing that survivors need support. And we also make referrals. So where we've got a situation which indicates that there's a situation of modern slavery or human trafficking happening, we can refer that onwards to investigative agencies. So we will also want to report how many referrals we're making. And with all of that, we record really comprehensive case notes to give our call handlers an understanding of what's happened on each call with each person who've called us. As I said, our data model is dynamic and flexible. It allows us to amend the model over time and reflect growing trends. It's also incredibly complex, which allows us to recognise the varying complexities of modern slavery and other interrelated crimes that we get reported to us. And with this data, I know that I'm biased, but I think we're able to do amazing things with it. Our data is really well regarded amongst the sector, but also you can see here in these examples, these are 5 different headlines that are directly linked to data that we've released from the helpline. We work with strategic partners to contribute towards research projects, contributing through all of this data that we hold from our conversations with all of the different types of people who call us. We also have the possibility to be commissioned for bespoke reports, so things such as campaign impact reports or deep dives into specific themes of exploitation or specific types of exploitation. So if anyone was interested in that, there'd need to be a discussion with our head of helpline services. Firstly, we'd need to see if it's data that we did already hold, and then look at what the cost would be for that report. Thanks, Hilary.
All right, thank you very much, Alice. Yeah, as you say, it's just a wealth of information on the helpline, isn't there? And I think that point around how you can really curate data depending on people's research priorities. I think the message there is that there's much lead-in time as possible that researchers are able to give us is ideal, because it might be that we're able to produce some curated data, but we need to start recording that data in the first instance. So if anyone is interested in working with us around helpline data, then please do get in touch as soon as possible so that we can start things moving in that direction. So thank you very much, Alice. I'm going to move next to Freya, who is a very experienced business engagement manager with Unseen, just to set out a little bit of the work that we do with the private sector. So over to you, Freya.
Thanks, Hilary. Yes, so as Hilary said, my name's Freya. I'm a business engagement manager here at Unseen. So it's not just me and the team. There's a whole host of us working in the corporate sector, aiming to improve businesses' modern slavery approaches and the methods that they use to identify and mitigate modern slavery in their own business actions. We do this in a whole host of ways. Next slide, please. Up on the screen there encapsulates the 4 main topics of work that we conduct with businesses. We work with them in a whole host of ways. The first category I've got up on the screen there is consultancy. Now, this is quite a broad topic, and there's lots of things that happen within this. Our consultancy elements can look like anything from a desk-based policy gap analysis, so working through businesses' already existing policies, identifying where there are gaps from a modern slavery perspective or a worker exploitation perspective, providing them with recommendations on how to remedy this. It could also look like conducting supplier risk assessments, so taking on board clients' supplier data, looking at that, assigning risk scores, and then providing sort of action plans for supplier engagement going forward based on those risk assessments. Escalation and remediation. This is something I'm doing a lot of at the moment, working with businesses. And what I mean by this is looking at what do they do if something is to be identified. It's that piece of, okay, we found it, now what? How do we work to make sure that the situation is remedied as best and as effectively as possible? It can also look like worker wellbeing visits. This is something that we've been doing a lot of over the last 2 years, but this actually involves us physically going onto site, typically on construction sites, but we have also done big projects surrounding manufacturing and facilities management as well. But the team go on site and speak to workers, asking them questions about their job, their wellbeing, the conditions where they're working, asking lots of questions generically about well-being, but always with that modern slavery lens, looking to identify any modern slavery or labour exploitation indicators. As I said, consultancy is quite a broad topic, and we're also quite flexible with it as well. So when we work with businesses, if we identify a gap in the processes that they already have, or if we identify that there's a different way that we could be working with them, we are in a position to develop that service with them and really get down into the detail and remedy any specific challenges that a business might be having. Another huge part of what we do is training. And again, this is quite tailored. We might have some sessions we deliver that are really core understanding of what modern slavery is. But actually what we're finding nowadays is that businesses are maybe looking to go a little bit further and trying to build that understanding of modern slavery. So maybe looking at some bespoke courses for procurement or HR, recruitment, or specific elements of the business that might be more likely to come into contact with modern slavery. This again can look like a whole different host of things. It could look like an in-person session, a workshop with people within a business or with suppliers of a business, so actually engaging the supply chain directly. It could also look like e-learning or online webinars as well. We then have our 2 membership packages, and these look a little bit different. So the Hub membership is actually a package of those things that we just spoke about. We work really closely with businesses over the span of a year or multiple years to put together a list of services that are going to really help that business specifically improve their approach to tackling modern slavery. So it could be that we've identified escalation remediation as something that a business really needs to work on. We will work with that business over the space of a year to help improve their stance in that area. We also run sector hubs as a part of this. So what I mean by that is we operate shared spaces for businesses in specific sectors to come together with us, with Unseen kind of as the facilitator, but to have everybody on a call where we can all talk together about shared issues, shared problems, and also shared solutions. I think it's something that's quite unique about the work that we do is we have this capacity to be able to group these people together in one room and actually have really meaningful conversations. It's also something that I think works quite well. I think often there's this perception of the corporate world that everyone's really vested in their own interests and is working towards their own goals as a business, and there's that level of competitiveness. And of course, there will always be some part of that, but actually in my experience we found that businesses are really willing to be collaborative where they can be and work together to overcome those problems together. And that also then leads me on to our portal membership, and this is actually really tied into what Alice has just been speaking about with the helpline data. So how the portal membership works is we cross-reference clients' supplier data, so names and addresses, across with Unseen's helpline data. And we do this in a way that all of the data that is analysed, anything that would then get shared with a client, completely sanitised. We don't provide any personal information. We don't provide any information that could identify a survivor to a client. However, what we do is provide situational data about a case to a portal member that then allows us to work with them to remedy a situation and carry out effective investigation. So whilst the helpline isn't an investigative body, many of these businesses have a really great position to be able to conduct their own investigations and to provide their own remedy. And this way allows Unseen to be a part of that and to keep oversight of what's happening. Next slide, please. Up on the screen there are some of the partners that we have worked with in 2024. And as you can see, it's a range of businesses across a whole host of different sectors. This means that we're in a really great position to provide insight into shared issues, trends, and challenges across not only those key sectors that we spoke about earlier with finance hubs and construction hubs, but also a whole range of other sectors as well. Also, the breadth of our work means that we have a really good practical understanding of the actions that businesses are currently taking to identify and mitigate modern slavery, but also gives us a really good practical understanding of the challenges and the roadblocks that they're facing and how we can work together to overcome those. That's my sort of whistle-stop tour of business services. I'll pass back to Hilary, but also if you want to get in touch, the business email address is in the slides as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Freya. I think you've set it out really well, haven't you, in terms of that real opportunity for both sort of the connections that the business team have with the corporate sector, those sector hubs, absolutely, but also those insights that you can bring of those gaps and blockers that you're seeing in this area. So thank you very much. So next, I wanted to touch on the Unseen Survivor Consultants, the Survivor Involvement Programme, because they're really integral, really, to all of our policy and research work. And as I said, that development of Unseen's operational delivery as well. So the consultant programme, it started back in 2022, and the aim of that was incorporating survivor voice into our work with the ultimate goal that people with lived experience would be at some point, hopefully quite soon, working at every level of Unseen as a result of the programme. The programme has been designed so that we as professionals, we can share with survivors our understanding from learnt experience, so that combined with their lived experience expertise, that they can become the real sort of authorities on modern slavery. I would say that we're not there yet. There's a lot of room for improvement and we are continuously learning together. But our goal is that we're going to move from survivor involvement to more of an area of survivor leadership in this space. And I want to talk a little on co-production, which is the way that the survivor consultants, they mostly get involved in policy and research, working with partner researchers or the Unseen team to design and deliver on research projects. And these are just some of the ways that the consultants can work on a project. So they can get involved right from the get-go. Researchers can approach us before they even have a shape of a project in their minds. They can hear from the consultants and what they know to be priority areas for academics, for research to be focusing on. They can get involved at the ground level in the development of research questions, how it will be conducted. They can perform data collection, analysis. Certainly they can get involved in the development of recommendations, write-up, dissemination, and review of the project as well, which I think is really key element for them to be involved with. But what we've seen is that whilst co-production is increasingly used in the modern slavery research space, it's only those highlighted in white that consultants are regularly or meaningfully engaged to participate. Those that are in red and sort of those in the orange brackets, these are the elements that need to see far more concerted energy to meaningfully co-produce with lived experience. And for me, these are also the most important areas. It's great to have someone with lived experience speaking at a dissemination event on their involvement, perhaps on the research findings. But I think if we want Survivor Voice to actually influence the research agenda, then we need to be bringing people in far earlier to shape what the research will actually be. I think there's little utility in asking survivors to get involved in a project that either they have no interest in or perhaps don't perceive to be useful or relevant. And that's why we need to be consulting them on what questions need to be asked, what issues actually matter to them. We're not saying, definitely not, that this is easy to get right, especially when you have the challenges of including people who don't have the right to work in the UK. For example, it's difficult to integrate survivor co-producers into research analysis or write-up without placing too high a burden on someone who's fulfilling a voluntary position. But we have some thoughts on how we can broaden this meaningful involvement of lived experience in research. These are just considerations from my point of view that are produced from the point of view of coordinating survivor involvement. So first of all, like I said, involve us from the get-go. And I really can't emphasize this enough. Come to us before you've even identified funding opportunities, if that's possible, so that you can hear from the consultants on what they feel are the priorities for the research agenda, so that when those funding opportunities do arrive, you can adapt a proposal around what they see as important. And also involve us in that bid process really thoroughly, and the consultants too. We know that the proposal deadlines are really tight, but if you can design a project with us, then it's just far more likely that the consultants are going to be invested and that you're going to avoid that really tokenistic survivor involvement. Similarly, where you're able to co-produce ways of working with us, then you're going to see far better results. We've found that sometimes researchers have perhaps a preconceived idea of what working with us will look like, what they'll need to bring, how the consultants will contribute. And I think finding out after that bid has been secured that far more investment in training or funding is needed, that consultants perhaps aren't able to collaborate in certain formats, then by that point it's a little bit too late. A little in the same vein, provide a roadmap once that way of working has been agreed. But I'm not going to say too much more on this because one of the consultants is going to expand on this in just one moment. On knowledge exchange, I think part of that tokenistic involvement of lived experience comes down to this very one-way extractive model of researchers identifying what it is that they want from survivors, and then the research process being built around that. I think that to do survivor involvement meaningfully, it's got to be that two-way process. So work with us to understand any training or upskilling that we might need to fully participate in that project. The consultants, they're experts of their experience, but they might need informing, for example, on the legislation relevant to the project or the wider context of your specialism within the modern slavery space. On remuneration, we all know that consultants must be remunerated for their time and therefore their expertise, but consider how much this may be once you factor in all of those planning meetings, the road mapping, the check-ins, the training. This really does add up in time, and of course that means in cost as well. I think consider as well, before getting involved, whether you need to be undertaking cultural competency training before working with the consultants, what blockers to effective communication and collaboration may need to be addressed before you can all be working together equitably. And I think similarly to that, have you had specific training on trauma-informed working? You may have been working in the modern slavery field for a long time or had contact with survivors before, but can you really confidently communicate and navigate those collaborative relationships with people with lived experience without inadvertently causing harm? I'd say that this is a continuous and a reflexive process, one certainly that I'm still working on, but it's just so important that we are equipping ourselves as much as possible before we enter into that dynamic and throughout the process as well. And then finally, on acknowledging difference, I think it's really important that none of us expect there to be a single survivor voice out there waiting to be heard. Survivors are a very diverse group of people who bring their own life experiences, their own views, and their own biases, just like we all do. They might not, for example, agree with the premise of your research, which is going to bring real challenges. They might hold very strong political or social views that you just don't feel like you can align with. And then another thing to consider, how are you going to incorporate their views and their interpretations into recommendations? For example, if they disagree with one another, and how are you going to do that? How are you going to navigate that without your own bias being introduced as well? And what does all of this require? It's time, a lot of time, a lot more of it than you might think. Unseen is here to support in a lot of this, the delivery of training and upskilling, but it requires thoughts and planning and time commitment from the research team as well. So those are some thoughts on good co-production from my perspective, from the consultant group coordination on policy priorities, just to give a bit of a flavour very quickly, given time, in terms of what Unseen is thinking about at the moment. Really, all of Unseen's policy priorities, they're always going to hinge around prevention, and prevention based on the public health model. So these are just some of the examples of what we're focused on at the moment. And our priorities, they're going to flex to respond to short and medium term issues that have arisen. They certainly have very recently or over the last couple of years around the inclusion of modern slavery provisions within immigration legislation, for example. But whilst those will be flexing, because the support of survivors is just so central to our work, improved protections and support for people who have been affected by exploitation, that's always going to remain a priority. And certainly, just to touch on some of the things here, we see survivors' right to work and leave to remain as a prevention policy where it reduces any risk of re-trafficking and really supports with that long-term recovery, which is just so key. We strongly feel that investment in prevention strategies will result in cost savings for the UK taxpayer, but we'd also like to demonstrate how efficiencies in the implementation of policies can act as a prevention tool without that large financial investment. We've long advocated for the role that the corporate sector play in preventing modern slavery, and more recently as well, obviously the public sector buyers as well. But we do seek to evidence how corporate responsibility can be leveraged in this way, and we'll continue to focus on that in our research for some time to come. And then finally, we know that the rights of the survivor and the prevention agenda really align, where we can see improved access to justice for survivors as well. Like I said, it might be that we need an entirely second event to really dig into what it is that the consultants are seeing as a priority at the moment. But I'll leave that there for the moment, as we have very little time left. Just to summarise, we are really keen to hear from any researchers or stakeholders who are interested to explore how they can work with us. Please do take a look at the policy and research page on our website. There's various examples of our work on there, but also information on how you can make inquiries for different things. You can, of course, reach out to the team using this email address, which will circulate along with the recording of the session.